It's time for Forward Nation Radio. Now here he is, the host of Forward Nation Radio, David Leventhal.
Hello and welcome to Forward Nation Radio. With me, David Leventhal. Our longtime listeners may know that we've changed the opening a little bit. You may have noticed. I usually start with good afternoon, but I've decided A, you may not be listening to this or watching this show in the afternoon, and 2, Donald Trump is still the president. So, welcome to the show, and on this week's show, as always, we will be spending some time on the news. In fact, we will be spending a lot of time on the news this week because there was a whole lot of news. But, to be fair, not all of it bad. We will also be giving a bit of an introduction to an ongoing segment that we'll have on this show. It's a topic that we will be dealing with a lot, which is basically how we got into this mess. Role of the media, how people are as uninformed as they are. And we will be working that within our show, perhaps a little bit at the end if we have time. Okay, getting right to the news. It was a good week if you are a natural disaster. Starting off with the Hurricane Maria that hit Puerto Rico and has devastated Puerto Rico, which is still primarily without any electricity and is expected to be that way for some time. Puerto Rico, whose economy was already in a bit of a shambles, and now is having to deal with the devastation of a storm. And then Hurricane Trump to follow. For days, Donald Trump did nothing about Puerto Rico. He was too busy texting fights with people. To be fair to Donald Trump, it probably took him 5 days to get the message that Puerto Rico is actually part of America, and people in Puerto Rico are Americans. So when Donald Trump finally did get involved, what did he do? He picked a Twitter war with Puerto Rico. He started a fight. Blames Puerto Rico for a lot of their problems. I especially enjoyed the part where he blames the banks, or talks about how the banks are going to have to be taken care of because Puerto Rico owes the banks so much money. Taken care of? Donald Trump is lecturing people about paying off their loans and taking care of the banks? I guess he expects Puerto Rico to declare bankruptcy several times in order to avoid paying their creditors. People who work for the government, sure they could figure out ways to stiff them too. Because this is apparently Donald Trump's way of taking care of people. But I understand some of the belligerence coming from our president, who has not yet gotten over the fact that Bernardo stabbed Riff. Yes, President Trump is a jet all the way through from his first cigarette to his last dying day. Puerto Rico can use a lot of help. I encourage our listeners, our viewers, to be generous if you can be and help support relief efforts through reputable relief organizations. We talk about blaming Puerto Rico for their problems. That brings us once again back to climate change. Did Puerto Rico create the climate change problem that we have that exacerbates hurricanes? No, this is typical. Rich people in America and elsewhere exacerbate climate change. Poor people suffer for it, and rich people then get to exclaim their moral superiority over the people they've damaged. Another natural disaster, of course, that we're still working through for the week is the major earthquake in Mexico, second one in a short time. This one located right outside Mexico City. At this point in time, when we go to air, over 330 people have already been confirmed dead. And you've probably all heard the story, the horrible, horrible story of a school collapse killing more than 30 children. Is Mexico responsible for this as well? What's interesting to learn from the Mexico earthquake is that Mexico City has an early warning system that actually prevented the death toll from being higher than it already was. Do you know who doesn't have an early warning system? If you guessed America, you'd be right. So when we get hit by a major earthquake and a lot of people are dead and we haven't even bothered to invest in the infrastructure necessary to help save these people's lives or protect these people's lives, are we going to be blaming us? In that case, we probably should be blaming us. One of the most heart-wrenching things that I read pertaining to the Mexico City earthquake was a resident saying, considering what we've been through, it feels like God is angry at us. I understand the feeling. There are no atheists in foxholes. I understand the need to believe that there is some sense to this. Because the alternative, which is far more likely to be true, is that this is just random crap and people are suffering, not because of any will of some benevolent or non-benevolent deity, but simply because they were in the wrong place at the wrong time. It was not a particularly good week if you were a natural disaster or an unnatural disaster named Donald Trump. First, Donald Trump picked a fight with a whole lot of people, which I guess makes it a good week for him with his base, but not such a good week for anybody else. I am man enough to admit when I am wrong. And last week, when we went to air, Donald Trump had just begun speaking to the United Nations, and all we had to rely on was his initial comments before his major speech. And it looked like we dodged a bullet. Well, I was wrong. It turns out when President Hurricane reached the mic, he was bellicose, he was incoherent, he picked a fight with just about everybody. He had the entire world scratching its head saying, who made this moron president and what do we do about this? But don't fret. One group that he was soft on, that he didn't aim his ire at, was Russia. Wonder why that happened. Donald Trump spoke in front of the UN and made the leader of North Korea, Kim Jong-un, look sane. Also looked far more intelligent than Donald Trump, but he made him look sane. In the Times at some point this week, conservative Republican columnist Bret Stephens commented that he was in Australia during the past week. And he said, people in Australia say, we understand Kim. We know what we're dealing with. He doesn't freak us out. But your president, he freaks us out. What a nice thing to be able to say for the United States of America. So, North Korea. Donald Trump's been continuing his fight with North Korea. Isn't this cute? The problem, of course, is that we can't let Donald Trump speak to his base. Every time he gets to speak to his base, either live or on Twitter, speaking to morons just riles him up. They just cheer him on. We have a good laugh over the prospect of nuclear conflagration. Ha ha, that's a good one. North Korea has deemed that the United States has already declared war on it. I don't mean to be taking North Korea's side. I'm not taking North Korea's side. But shouldn't there be one sane adult in the room? As usual, Donald Trump's administration is busy running away from things that he's been saying. Don't listen to the president. He's just, the president. As you all know, Donald Trump has picked a fight with the NFL. NFL players, NBA players. Once again, sadly, the president has demonstrated that he is out of his intellectual league against NBA stars. with LeBron James and Steph Curry both winning the Twitter battle against Donald Trump, the president. This whole concept of attacking people for refusing to properly salute the flag. This was done under Obama. This has been done forever. With all due respect, I'm all in favor of patriotism, although it is, of course, as we're reminded again, the last refuge of the scoundrel. But are we too stupid to understand the difference between being a patriot and dressing like a patriot? I'm sure others have commented on the irony of Trump supporters busy waving the U.S. flag. The good news, of course, is that they managed to put down their Confederate flags in order to do so. The people who were carrying the Confederate flags and making monuments to people who tried to rip this country apart are now angry at people who are not patriotic enough to stand at attention during the Star-Spangled Banner? This is where we are. We have a president and a political party that is somehow in cahoots with Russia. The patriots on the right don't give a shit about that. We know for a fact that Russia, a hostile foreign power, has influenced a U.S. election. We're still finding out how much the president was complicit in that theft. But we know that Russia has affected the election. And the patriots on the right say, oh, get over it. We don't care. Trump attacks Gold Star families. Families who've lost a loved one fighting for this country, fighting for this very flag they purport to stand for. What do these patriots do? They don't give a shit. Trump attacks the media. The foundation of democracy is information. So attack the media. Spread lies on your own. Attack judges. Threaten the separation of powers. In other words, completely undermine the United States Constitution. Pardon someone who'd been convicted in a criminal court of violating an order of our co-equal branch of government, the judicial system. Pardon Joe Arpaio. They cheer it on. Take away voting rights from people who might vote for the other side. A staple of the Republican Party and a staple of its plans for future electoral success. And what do the morons on the right do? Okay, yeah, that sounds fine to me. But you better make sure you stand at attention when the flag's there. This idea of putting form ahead of substance is a mark of people who can't understand the substance or who always want to win. How did we get to this point? How did we get to people who can't tell the difference between a faux salute and a real respect for this country and its traditions? That's the thing we'll be talking about over the next several weeks. But it wasn't just Trump attacking football players who had the nerve to protest extrajudicial killings, murders by police officers, and this country's disinterest in doing something about it. No, he laments the fact that violence was taken out of football. The President of the United States actually stands up and speaks in favor of concussions, in favor of brain injuries. Admittedly, he has to be a bit of a fan of brain damage. Getting rid of brain damage would eat away tremendously at his base. But the President of the United States stands up and calls for more football players to suffer brain damage. And the morons on his side stand up and applaud him for that? What kind of shit are you? Trump says that the game is not the same as it used to be when it was more violent. Okay, I get that. I've been a football fan for a long time. I see that. You know what? President Trump, I think you're onto something. You know what else isn't the same? Politics, since we took the dueling out. You know what we need more of in America? Dueling in politics. Maybe someone in our Congress should challenge the president to a duel. You probably wouldn't even have to shoot your gun. The moron would probably shoot himself. Okay, other ways that Donald Trump has picked fights or lost during the week. Lunatic Jesus. Roy Moore has beaten Luther Strange for the Republican nomination for Senate in Alabama. Donald Trump had supported Luther Strange. Well, not at the end. And by next week, Donald Trump will have convinced himself and his base that he never supported Luther Strange, that he was a big fan of Roy Moore all along. Lunatic Jesus. The Democrat who will be facing Roy Moore in the general election pointed out that this election means that Alabama's public reputation is at stake. Alabama has a public reputation that they would be worried about losing? Here's some of Roy Moore's highlights. A man who is so extreme that President Manchild and the Republican Party supported his opponent. Very much supported his opponent. Roy Moore was removed from the Alabama Supreme Court twice. Once, when he refused to take down the 10 Commandments under court order, because after all, this country, if you're on the right, you are very concerned about this country falling under Sharia law. No, this country should fall under Jesus law. And then again, Roy Moore, when he told court clerks that it was perfectly okay for them to refuse to marry same-sex couples in violation of federal law and the United States Constitution. But don't worry, Trump voters, he salutes the flag, so he's okay. Luther Strange himself was an interesting story. Good choice in Alabama. Luther Strange was put into his Senate seat, the seat vacated by our beloved Attorney General, Jefferson Beauregard. He was put into his seat by the governor of Alabama, who he was investigating on criminal charges as the Attorney General of Alabama. No problem there. Seems all above board to me. Also this week, not so good for Trump, the Russia investigation got a little bit more serious this week. We're not sure exactly what's going on, but it has been leaked that the Mueller investigation, is seeking documents pertaining to Trump's behavior in the White House. Lots of behavior. Lots of behavior of subordinates. You better get those pardons ready, President Manchild, because a lot of people are going to be in a lot of trouble unless apparently they come out and testify against you. Still to be seen is whether the Mueller investigation encompasses what many of us think it really needs to encompass, which is Donald Trump's financial dealings, including his dealings with Russia and others. We hope that Mueller's investigating that. We take heart from the fact that we could probably bet that Eric Schneiderman, the Attorney General of New York, is investigating it. So, it's already being leaked that Trump is making inquiries about whether he can fire Mueller and what the reaction would be. And apparently Republicans seem to be saying you probably could do that. Does anybody think that the Republicans are going to stand up if Donald Trump fires the person investigating him for treason? as long as we salute the American flag, why should we worry about constitutional crises like these? What will happen to this country if Donald Trump fires the person investigating him for treason and our Congress says, ho hum? What will happen in this country if Democrats manage with a supermajority to take over the House of Representatives in 2018 and decide to impeach Donald Trump for firing the special prosecutor, or in any case engage in investigations such as the prosecutor might have been undergoing? You think Trump voters are going to accept this lying down without going off half-cocked? Wait, I'm sorry, I don't want to use that metaphor, because they'll clearly be going off fully cocked. These are dangerous times. Okay, speaking of Trump voters, did you notice how Trump was appearing in front of crowds who were chanting, "Lock her up, lock her up"? Oh, they're so clever. They so love America. What are those morons going to be saying now that it turns out that this scandal that was always a bullshit scandal is now more obviously a bullshit scandal, because it turns out that pretty much the entirety of the Trump administration has been using private email accounts even after this whole fiasco? Meaning not only that it was bullshit, but that they knew it was bullshit all along, that they knew it was a non-story. At least 6 members of the Trump administration have been using private email accounts, including his closest advisors, his former chief of staff, and his children. But don't worry, morons. Just keep chanting, "Lock her up," because Hillary's the criminal here. Okay, let's go to a little bit of good news. And the good news is the Republicans' latest effort to repeal Obamacare is as dead as thousands of Americans would have been if it wasn't. Maybe millions of Americans. Graham Cassidy, some of you have probably followed the war. Once again, when a late night comic clearly knows more about a bill, has more decency and more integrity than the Republicans in Congress and the president, you really have a problem. And yet Jimmy Kimmel clearly knew more about that bullshit bill than the Republicans' bill. According to the Center on Budget and Policy Priorities, which has looked at the bill quickly being all that anyone was allowed to look at this bill that they tried to rush through, before the Congressional Budget Office can look into it and pronounce how bad it was, the CBPP has estimated that it would end coverage for more than 30 million people within a few years. It would gut Medicaid. It would eliminate or weaken protections for pre-existing conditions. It would increase out-of-pocket health care costs. In other words, it would screw Americans and screw up our healthcare system, which is why, as I'm sure you know by now, basically every healthcare agency in America came out opposed to this bill. But they missed the big picture. One other thing that the bill would do is shower tax cuts on the wealthiest Americans. Let's understand, Junior might need to be sacrificed. Don't be so selfish, Junior. Billionaires need more money, Junior. This bill was so cruel and vindictive, it specifically targeted bigger reductions for states that don't vote Republican and didn't vote for Trump. It targets bigger reductions in health care support for those states that had the nerve to actually try to implement Obamacare properly for the good of their people and the healthcare system. They will somehow, before we are done, be punished for that. How bad was this? How naked was this in sacrificing Americans for the good of the biggest scum on the planet? Well, You might have heard what Iowa Senator Chuck Grassley said about the bill. I could maybe give you 10 reasons why this bill shouldn't be considered. But Republicans campaigned on this so often that you have a responsibility to carry out what you said in the campaign. In other words, we're going to deliver this piece of shit because they told them we were going to. But of course, Senator Grassley, that is not what you promised people. You promised people that you had something better, and you were going to replace Obamacare with something better. You were lying, Senator Grassley. Anyone with half a brain understands that you've been lying all along. You were lying for 8 years of the Obama administration about all the things that he was doing badly that you could do better. Well, here we are almost a year into the Trump administration, and what have we learned? You've got nothing. You've been lying. This is the problem they have. At some point, you might actually have to deliver on some of your lies. And how do you do that? It's all about the donors. It's all about giving more money to billionaires. This was indicated by the Republican Senator Cory Gardner, who's in charge of the hush money, the slush funds, talking about how funding was drying up from billionaires because we weren't delivering to our morons. Rob Reiner, who I like and respect, thanked John McCain for once again being a hero in helping to torpedo this bill. Hero? This is how far down we define hero? Someone who, for political gain and to pay off billionaires, won't sacrifice millions of Americans and their health care? That's about as far down as we're defining the term president or presidential. And finally, one of the co-authors of the bill in proving that fact is funnier than fiction, actually used a tweet by President Trump as evidence of the bill's merits. See, President Trump said that people weren't going to be thrown off of health care. That proves it must be so. The man actually did this and said this. Just released is the Trump tax cut plan. What a surprise. Didn't see this one coming. Republican senators had already embraced the plan that increases the debt and increases the deficit. Donald Trump's plan that they're all behind? What a surprise. Tax cuts for businesses. Tax cuts for rich people. Tax cuts for pass-through businesses. Why is this important? What do you need to know about a pass-through business? That's how Donald Trump and his friends earn their money. The elimination of the estate tax, which we talked about in the last couple of weeks, tax on billionaires or very, very wealthy millionaires. This is their priority. Forget funding for anything you need, like job training or clean air. We're going to pay off to billionaires. But wait a minute. It's not a payoff for billionaires because we're going to close unspecified deductions. We'll tell you later, taking a page out of the Paul Ryan School of Budgetary Math. It all adds up because we've got all these deductions that we're going to tell you about later on, as if they actually exist. Are Republicans being hypocritical and not caring about the debt and the deficit? No, they're not being hypocritical. Republicans never care about the debt and the deficit when they're in charge. They only care about the debt and the deficit when Democrats are in charge, so that they could say we don't actually get to do what you want to do to help people and fix this country. But when we're in charge, we always have enough money to make billionaires richer. Have I said this enough? Make billionaires richer. Who the fuck signs on to this? How stupid do you have to be, Trump voters, who thinks he's going to bring your jobs back? But that's okay. Republicans are back to relying on voodoo economics to make the math work. That's okay. There's going to be such economic growth that it's not even going to worsen things. The same bullshit they've been peddling for 40 years that even the original authors of supply side economics have said, oh, really? Get over it. We never thought that was serious. That's bullshit. It was interesting as Bob Corker notes, big deficit hawk during the Obama administration. He notes, I will not support a bill if it worsens not our debt or our deficit, our fiscal situation. It's equivocation. Change the rules. What is our fiscal situation? Whatever the fuck Bob Corker thinks benefits our fiscal situation. And thus, they could pass this disgraceful bill. German elections saw the rise of the far-right party in Germany. Trump exacerbating the problem of the far-right. A far-right party in Germany? What could go wrong? No problem there. And finally, let's leave off with our ethical scumbag of the week. We should turn this into a recurring episode because there's always one that jumps to the fore. And this week's scumbag of the week, Tom Price, Secretary of Health and Human Services, who it's been reported has taken at least 24 flights on private charter planes at taxpayers' expense since May. 24 flights worth more than $300,000. I'm sure you've seen this reported all over Fox News. His predecessors, by the way, all managed to fly commercial. Tom Price, who can't afford to pay for his flights or to fly commercial, has an estimated net worth of $13.6 million, making him a pauper in the Trump administration. If you've got enough left in your heart after donating to Puerto Rico, Mexico City recovery, maybe you could send some money to Tom Price, who at $13.6 million has to carry the golf bags of the other members of the Trump administration. The fact that we're even saying only $13.6 million, and I've had many people say that to me, that doesn't sound like a whole lot. Well, if you put that money in a bank account at this point, you can get a 1% return on investment. That's $136,000 a year without touching your principal, without working, without doing anything. If you can get 2%, that's $272,000 a year doing nothing. And this is the poor guy in the Trump administration. When caught, he tried to lie his way out of it. Why not? Their voters will believe anything. That's it for today's show. We will talk more over the coming weeks about all the bullshit that the Trump voters managed to believe year after year, despite all the evidence to the contrary. As always, thank you for joining us. Like looking forward, go to forwardnationradio.com. That's forwardnationradio.com and get the full experience. You'll see the video from this and every episode there and on our YouTube channel as well. Don't miss the next Forward Nation Radio podcast on Podbean at podbean.com. If you love what you heard, like what you heard, tolerate what you heard, please like us on Facebook. Please subscribe to our YouTube channel. Please share us with your friends and your family members. Spread the word. Forward Nation Radio. See you next week.
You've been listening to Forward Nation Radio with David Leventhal.